Welcome to the Oscoda Township regular board meeting, 22 January 2018. Let's start with the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call.
Mr. Cummings.
Here.
Ms. McGuire.
Here.
Mr. Gasky.
Here.
Mr. Palmer.
Here.
Mr. Nordine here. Mr. Byer.
Here.
Mr. Weed.
Here. Agenda additions. Do we have anything?
I had one item I was going to mention relative to purchase of a snow blower, but it doesn't probably merit action, just an informational item.
All right, so under your information,
Yes.
anything else?
No, sir.
Another thing I have is canceling this closed session since our attorney could not be here. Anything regarding that? All right, then, all in favor, or I guess I need a motion for the, setting the agenda.
I'll make the motion. We set the agenda with the changes.
Support.
Motion by Ms. McGuire, support by Mr. Byer. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Next is public comments. For this first public comment period, there's a 4-minute time limit. You have to fill out a card and turn it into the superintendent. And when you come to speak, please introduce yourself. Is there any cards?
There are two. First would be Judith Smith, who would like to talk about the beach park property.
Hi, I am here on behalf of the Oscoda Rotary, and if I can take a couple minutes to read the letter, it's just to express concerns we might have for your consideration when you're entering into the talks about what changes might be made. Not trying to tell you how to do your job, and I'm sure you're going to do what's right for the township, but if you bear with me. Dear Supervisor Weed, on behalf of the Rotary Club of Oscoda, I am writing this letter regarding the future developments changes at the Township Beach Park. We are aware of the discussions regarding possible renovations of the bathhouse and have heard there is talk regarding the relocation of the band shell. First, let me offer our support for establishing a concession stand of some sort at the beach. We have a beautiful beach that is visited by hundreds during the summer months. It would be a draw for vacationers as well as our local citizenry to have the benefit of a convenient place to buy a cool drink, snacks, and a light lunch. Families, particularly with children who don't want to leave the beach on a hot summer day, would welcome the convenience to get reasonably priced refreshments at the beach. Vacationers are looking for relaxation and convenience. Done well, this could be a huge impetus for people to plan return vacations. We're sure you're all aware of the summer concert series sponsored by Rotary that are held on Thursday evenings throughout the summer. These concerts are extremely well attended by our local citizenry as well as vacationers. These events showcase our beautiful beach and community spirit to visitors and are a likely draw for them to return. The bands are paid by a pass-the-hat donation from those in attendance. The bands are guaranteed a minimum amount, and any shortfall from the collection is paid by Rotary. The only money we make is from sale of popcorn, pop, water, snow cones, and cotton candy. High school students from our sponsored Interact Club sell the refreshments. It is a learning experience that helps to develop interpersonal skills, leadership, and teaches responsibility. Excuse me. The exemplary behavior demonstrated by these kids speaks well of our community as a whole. We would ask that during any discussions and or planning for a concession vendor that you would consider carving out, if possible, Thursday evenings from any contract. This would enable us to continue selling refreshment at our summer concert series. We've already set the schedule for the 2018 concerts and bands have been secured. We are confident the community looks forward to these concerts and would be saddened see them end. If changes are to be made that would impede us from continuing the series, we would ask that you notify us as soon as possible. I attended every concert last summer and repeatedly heard comments on how beautiful and clean our beach is and how wonderful it is to watch the band with the view of Lake Huron as its backdrop. It is truly a stunning setting. Regarding comments made about a band needing sunglasses, they were a returning band and come prepared. We have to believe that was a good-natured comment as they put on their sunglasses and continued performing. No actual complaint was received by us. The sun becomes an issue only during the last couple of concerts in August due to the sunset starting a little earlier. We hope the comments heard regarding the possibility of moving the band shell are rumors. The band shell was a vision of a Rotarian who was a local business leader who had the ability to get unprecedented community support for this project. Lots of people worked tirelessly to make this happen. If moving the band shell is your plan, we would ask you to be mindful of the work and the people who made this a reality. Please don't send the wrong message to the community. If it's not broke, don't fix it. In closing, let us say we do have a deep appreciation for all you do for our community. Thank you very much.
Do we have another card?
We do. We have two more now. Arnold LaRich would like to talk about the access agreement for the GAC plant site and PFAS issues.
Good evening. Ani LaRich. I live on Westwood Drive as a citizen, and I'm also the co-chair of the community half of the RAP. I want to applaud the township on starting to finalize the access at a site so that the Air Force can build the control equipment that they've been required since 2014 to investigate. And so that's a very big step in the control of the PFAS pollution that's been going into the storm sewer and then Van Etten Creek for decades based on data analysis by the DEQ. It's especially timely that you're taking this action now because just last week the Department of Environmental Quality issued a notice of violation to the Air Force on January 16th, putting them on notice formally that they have violated the deadline of December 31st to have the filtering units in place, operating, and tested by the end of last month. It puts them on a strict schedule to have the units installed and operational by August 1st. Or if not, then they have to have a temporary system in place. So the first step, and you're going to, once you authorize access to that site, they have to submit plans by the March 1st to the DEQ to give them detailed drawings of how that system is going to look. So your action, hopefully that you take tonight, will make that happen or allow it to happen. A second item on PFAS. In your May 7th, 2017 goals and objectives for the year, you have consideration to proactively advocate for effective and timely environmental remediation of PFAS at Wordsmith Air Force Base. Specifically, participating in the RAB is one of the, and monitoring the Restoration Advisory Board actions. I applaud you for taking that formal objective and goal, and I would suggest that you look into the possibility of helping the community understand what the RAB is about and what its purpose is to provide outreach and information to the public. And I suggest the best way to do that is what you're doing, same thing you're doing tonight with your video recording and broadcasting on YouTube, and then sometime in the future to the PEG channel. And I suggest that you look into the funding of that for future RAB meetings. Follow on that same line. The next RAB meeting was supposed to be tomorrow night. It was canceled because of the shutdown. It will be rescheduled the second week of February. Right now, a tentative date is February 13th. And I'd also like to announce that Funding for video recording has been secured by a local nonprofit. So we'll get that first one out and the public will be able to see it. We'll provide more information and that nonprofit will make their own announcements also. Thank you.
Have another card?
I do. Paul Rakowski would like to talk about township spending.
Hello, my name is Paul Rakowski. I'm an Oscoda resident. And I'm here to talk about our elected officials that we put into office, and we trust them to be good stewards of our tax money, spend our money wisely. I've got an article here from the Oscoda Press, copies of it, because I couldn't find any minutes on the meeting that was held in between, or in December, a special meeting. So I'm using the Oscoda Press notes here. And I quote in this article, it says, the existing storm sewer through which discharge would travel has been inspected before the airbase closed in 1993. Of course, they're talking about storm sewer where the GAC plant that Mr. LaRiche just talked about is going to be discharging into. Well, the truth is that sewer was last inspected in 2012 at the request of the township. And that report, which I have in my hand right here, says that sewer was in really good condition. And there was a video done of that sewer, and it was handed over to the township. So part of the justification that I surmised or I learned from the meeting that you had justifying doing this sewer inspection was that it hadn't been done in 20 years, when the reality is that's not true. So the contract that went forward was gone forward on false pretenses. The report said that sewer was found to be in very good condition and with no problems. The officials who are present here that are part of the township were part of the township then when that report was done and actually requested for by the township. So they essentially lied to us about the reasons they were doing it now. They went ahead and spent $7,000 of our money when it was unnecessary. And imagine what the report said, as quoted from Ms. Richards at the last meeting. The township or the storm sewer was in very good condition and there were no problems. So I'm not even sure if they did the inspection, because the plants were never turned off. And I'm not sure how they ran a video camera through the sewers when there was probably a couple of feet of water in there. But anyways, the report sounds like it's identical to what was reported back in 2012. The sewer company that's did this work has been around. You may have seen them around the base all over the place. They've been doing sewer work for several months now. And it's just curious. I heard that the owner of that company is a relative of the township supervisor. And I'm just wondering, why is it that they keep getting all this work from the township? And I think the question needs to be asked and answered as to if that's true, is he getting any kickbacks from awarding those contracts to this company? And I understand why they went ahead and did it, even though it wasn't necessary. There was the minutes from that meeting, or the last meeting, where it talked about the condition of the sewer. The minutes that I have in my hands right here didn't say anything about that, which was identical to what it said in the previous report. So I'm curious as to why that was left out. Seems a pretty critical thing to include in minutes, that what was reported from that contractor was the same that was reported back in 2012. And the last thing I have to say is that we already know how to vote based on how you guys voted on the dope smoking ordinance. But if you guys go ahead and vote the same way on taking our nativity scene down, you can assure yourselves you won't be in office very long. Thank you.
Any other cards?
There are none.
All right, first of all, we'll address the Beach Park band shell, since I'm the one who made those comments. I want to make sure that everybody's aware that during that meeting, a lot of different ideas were thrown around. My intention was in no way to interfere with the Rotary Club. We definitely recognize the great work you guys do. My intent was that the park be a blank slate and that we could rework things. And whether that band shell is moved to a new place or replaced with a whole new band shell, either way, somehow making bigger improvements for the park. So, but I appreciate your involvement with this.
Dispelling rumors before they start.
The other one here on township spending, minutes for the special meeting for December are not posted. Do you have a status on that?
Yeah, the minutes are in existence. They aren't posted to the website. Anyone who wants access to them, I'm not impeding. Anyone who could contact my office, I could give them. But I can make sure they're posted as soon as the meeting's over tonight.
Okay, sewer inspection in 2012. Do we know about that?
There was an inspection done in that general time frame.
On the same lines?
There was, yes.
Okay.
And I believe there was some reference to that during earlier discussion as a possibility.
As a possibility.
Yeah, we have since confirmed that that is, in fact, true.
Okay. Next of all, not sure if the inspection was done this last time.
We have video, or I shouldn't say, we have a thumb drive that has pictures, so,
Right.
of the actual inspection, and there's, you can see water in the pipe. I didn't honestly look and watch every foot of footage, because it kind of nauseates me to have that.
And it's
view,
all
but-
dated, right?
Yes, it is dated.
Next of all, city sewer is a relative of the supervisor. Surprised me. As far as I know, I don't have any close relatives in Michigan, so. Oh. All right, the floor is now closed to public comment. Next on to the consent agenda. About the minutes for January 8th, 2018. Any questions on that? Payment of bills of $167,403.93. Any comments for that? Reports for the Oscoda County GIS project and the Asable Shared Services overhead allocations. And then the real estate RFP. Any comments? Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved. Support.
Motion by Mr. Gajewski, support by Mr. Cummings. Roll call.
Mr. Byer,
Yes.
Mr. Cummings,
Yes.
Mr. Nordine, yes. Mr. Palmer,
Yes.
Mr. Gajewski,
Yes.
Ms. McGuire,
Yes.
Mr. Weed.
Yes, motion's passed. Next, subcommittee reports, project updates. Easements for Phase 1 water main extension. I know we are awaiting affidavits that we've sent to the property owners to, I think that's the last bit of information we need from property owners, right?
We still have a couple easements on Van and Dam Road to secure, and then in regard to the title commitment, the owner affidavits have been sent out.
Okay. Regarding the bike path, we had a meeting with Spicer on 11 January. They've switched project managers on it. That project manager is now fully updated. And later in here, we have an item that pertains to progress on the portion of the bike path that goes from the school to Oscoda Park. For Phase 1, from Mill Street Bridge to the school, the what's it called? The land portion of it. So inspection they're going to do, and then they're going to go out for bids, and construction should be complete by this fall.
Okay.
They're going to start from the school and work their way back to the bridge, while the County Road Commission at the same time will be working the part that's attached to the Mill Street Bridge. Then last week we had an Oscoda Township Association meeting. There were concerns about consumers' energy response times for down power lines. how long the fire department has to sit on those lines. It could be up to 2 hours. I know that you've expressed those concerns to the county before. Consumer says they're working on their union agreements so that they can have faster response times. As it is now, employees have to take their vehicles back to their West Branch Center, then go home. When there's an emergency, they have to go get their vehicles from West Branch and come back. And
Wow.
so they've promised to make improvements on that. However, the road commission has completely given up on the whole thing and said basically they'd rather do nothing than put barricades up around power lines. And we also discussed a recycling program. I expressed to them I would prefer a county-wide program rather than a spotty program, but the county pushed it off onto another organization anyway. So hopefully we'll see some progress with that over the next year since we badly need recycling.
Yes.
Does anybody have anything else?
The Oscoda Community Center has a meeting coming up this Thursday morning at 10 o'clock, and the Developed by Osco group met just this month, a couple of weeks ago. The topic of the meeting was to review and discuss, review, and prepare to approve their new bylaws in the next meeting, which will be the beginning of February. So the date and time of that has not been established, but it would be coming up. So this is going to set the Developed by Osco group in a more stable footing than they've been recently. Just their bylaws have been quite old and they weren't following them, and so they're trying to get it all straightened out. That's it.
Anything else?
A question. The county indicated they don't want to put any barricades up for down power lines.
Yes,
Correct.
that was actually a quote. That's exactly what the guy said.
If there's a washout of a culvert or damaged bridge from flooding or bad rainstorm, they put the barricades out, don't they?
Mm-hmm.
What's the difference in danger, in degree of danger? A live power line across the road or a washed out culvert? They seem like
Right.
similar.
He expressed that them putting barricades up subjects them to liability, even though there's a law that says that absolves them of liability regarding down power lines.
Really? He would be Mr. Boland?
No,
The chairman of the,
I don't know which one's the chairman.
okay, I don't know either, so I'd rather not list them. But that seems rather bizarre to me, because, they're of equal danger in my mind. A live electric power line across the road or a bridge that not necessarily is washed out, but severely damaged that can really cause a traffic problem.
Mm-hmm.
And they definitely put barricades up for that. I'm looking for a little consistency here, but. Thank you.
This is really bothering me. Who owns city sewer? So I can figure out if this is a relative.
The last name starts with a, it's like Sadalowski or something like,
Thomas Satkowiak, I believe.
okay,
is
I
the
was kind
name.
of close.
Kind of.
Guess I need to get on Ancestry.com and figure this out. All right, next on the report, Superintendent, E-commerce Exchange Zone.
Okay. We talked about this idea at the last meeting and set it aside pending provision of additional information. There was discussion about potential liability exposure and how we might address that. So some verbiage has been added to prospective signs. There's a couple different iterations included in the packet. And I note, for clarification purposes, I think we covered this ground Friday morning. It's an orientation difference, not a verbiage difference. So what the question is under consideration this evening then is, do we want to go ahead and establish an e-commerce zone inclusive of placing signage. It would be generally behind my office, in front of the mechanical room there, parking spots in that general locale, based on that signage or some version of it.
Comments?
This probably doesn't need to be said, but just in case, you have a sample sign from Delta Township down near Lansing, and then you have two examples of what we might put up. Are you going to put the hyphen between E and commerce?
Thank you.
Certainly can. Yeah.
Makes it a lot clearer. I mean,
Yeah.
Look at the Delta. And in your narrative, you mention e-commerce 2 or 3 times, and the hyphen is there, so.
Anything else?
We talked about this Friday, but I just thought I'd ask again, just to be double sure, this setup for the signage, takes care of some concerns that the attorney had liability-wise?
It does. I certainly don't want to speak for our attorney, but he's aware of the verbiage, and it does mitigate. It doesn't eliminate, but it does
Absolutely.
help, yes.
Thank you.
Well, I still think it's a good idea. And to that end, I would like to make a motion to proceed with the e-commerce zone concept, inclusive of placement of signage as proposed.
Support.
Motion by Mr. Palmer, support by Mr. Cummings. Any other comments? Roll call.
Mr. Gasky,
Yes.
Ms. McGuire,
Yes.
Mr. Byer,
Yes.
Mr. Nordine, yes, Mr. Palmer,
Yes.
Mr. Cummings,
Yes.
Mr. Weed.
Yes, motion's passed. Next, strategic planning initiatives and timeline.
Yes, I've attached a copy of the goal statement that was established last May. For purposes of reference in that goal statement, one of the objectives involved evaluating automated meter reading technologies and costs. To do that, we had talked about some information last fall, and there was concern expressed that the cost benefit based on that particular quotation was questionable of moving forward. Another quote was obtained, in this case from Ferguson Waterworks, to supply Neptune brand products, because we now have the potential, it looks like if we were going to move forward for a bidding scenario. I sent the price quotes by separate communication to the board for your consideration. So the basic question, and I don't necessarily think we will come to conclusion this evening on it, is based on that new quote, do we believe that the cost effectiveness gap has been narrowed to the extent that we should consider moving forward with this initiative? Probably that question will require further study, discussion, and evaluation. Also related to the goal statement is an attachment in the form of a letter from a former economic development director to the then superintendent of the Oscoda area schools, dealing with a deed restriction that pertains to Pertoff Field. We had set forth in our goal statement that we would like to evaluate those deed restrictions in terms of establishing dialogue on how to use the property moving forward. This obviously relates to the park plan development process we have underway, but in considering use of the property, it appears not to be burdened by a deed restriction based on the findings that were unearthed back then. The only limitation is if we were to sell the property based on the more recent conveyance, we would need to split the proceeds with the Oscoda area schools. So hopefully that information will be helpful as we consider park development moving forward. The third element of this topic is the strategic planning process itself, and it relates to the previous two topics indirectly. Do we, in essence, do we wish to meet to begin the strategic planning process early in the year as we typically do, given that the goals were adopted in May? One alternative might be to consider meeting in mid to late February to start talking about issues like I just outlined, with the intent then later in the spring of doing a full review of the goals and objectives. So once we're comfortable that we've run all the outstanding issues to ground that were supposed to have been accomplished in the first year. So basically, that is my suggestion, is that we take a look at scheduling a session in mid to late February, focus initially on specific topics that might be outstanding, with the intent of revisiting the plan and its overall configuration after that occurs.
Comments? Does anybody have any idea on, for the next meeting? Work session?
I would like to have it sooner rather than later. I would suggest perhaps the week of February 12th.
I agree with Bill. We have the audit and end of tax season coming up the end of February, so I'd rather do it sooner myself.
Not the week of February 5th?
12th is a meeting.
That week, sometime in that week.
Oh, I
The week
see.
of
Not
February
that
12th. No, the week of February 12th.
All right.
Are we looking for an afternoon 2 to 5 kind of a thing, or?
Been doing, yes.
Okay.
I have the 14th, 15th, and 16th available.
Okay.
I have to be in my office on February 14th to collect taxes for the last day, so before penalty.
15th and 16th?
Works for me.
15th
15th?
and
Good with me.
16th are good for me.
15th in the afternoon?
Sure.
Okay, 2 to 5.
It's a good start time, Mr. Byer.
Thursday, afternoon, whatever is good for the group. I'm fine with anything in the afternoon.
2 o'clock?
3?
2?
3? 2? 2 is
Two.
good.
Yeah.
That's good.
I make a motion that we have our strategic planning work session February 15th at 2 p.m.
Support.
Motion by Mr. Weed, support by Mr. Palmer.
I have a question. With the intent to talk about outstanding issues, as Mr. Stalker outlined? Okay.
Roll call?
Mr. Palmer,
Yes.
Mr. Byer,
Yes.
Ms. McGuire,
Yes.
Mr. Cummings,
Yes.
Mr. Gasky,
Yes.
Mr. Nordine, yes, Mr. Weed.
Yes, motion's passed. Next, access agreement for the GAC plant.
Yes, I've attached a draft agreement which would facilitate access to a particular parcel of property by the United States Air Force for siting of the granular activated carbon plant. This parcel is generally east of the community center. I've attached a property survey and map indicating it's parcel 07. We had previously identified this parcel as an acceptable location for the treatment plant, and the access agreement is intended to formalize an understanding in that regard. There are a couple of unanswered questions in the agreement, one relating to consideration. As we talked on Friday morning, the underlying, I think, understanding had been that there would be no consideration. We would want to formalize that. And also paragraph 4 includes a termination date. So I'm seeking confirmation from the board that consideration would not be required, and if there's any input relative to a termination date that we might incorporate in the agreement before we send it to the Air Force. And I note the Air Force has not had a chance to review this document. We might receive some feedback. One other point I thought I should raise that is not hugely significant, but the agreement does not talk about routine maintenance like mowing and so forth either, and that's something we've touched on in the past. We might consider adding that, certainly at the board's discretion.
Comments?
I do have a comment, yes. Paragraph 4, I remember in the work session I commented that an absolute date might be difficult to predict and that we might do something along the lines of, I don't know, a date and with something of significance, like once the Department of Environmental Quality gives them the pass that they've met their criteria, and then they've got so much time from there in which to remove the building that they said they were going to do. I mean, there's going to have to be some time there, it seemed.
So,
But I don't know how to judge the duration, and I don't know that anyone else here could either.
so something along the lines of X months after cessation of operations.
I think that's fair.
Well, my recommendation was agreement will terminate within 90 days of the date the MDEQ or Air Force determines remediation is complete, whichever is later.
So a maximum of 90 days then.
Right. Well, if for some reason during the removal of stuff, after the remediation is deemed complete, and they need to remove all of their stuff, if there
Right.
needs to be an extra timeline that can be looked at that point. But
Is the facility something we think that they can take down that quickly? And what if it's during the winter? I know that they're planning a larger facility than the one we currently have because they anticipated growth and possibly putting in another treatment system in that facility. So I'm not sure. I mean, it's kind of a warehouse type of a shell, but just, I
I'd
don't
say
know.
180 days, but of course later on, if needed, an amendment can be made
Fair enough.
based on
Yeah.
the approval of both parties.
Well, with that in mind, couldn't we put a specific date? In other words, say January 22nd of 2028 would be 10 years. The next paragraph does allow for modifications of the agreement so that if at that date they needed more time, we could certainly amend the agreement. I just did some quick calculations the other day at they're proposing 500 gallons a minute. And I understand that the plant won't run 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. But if it did, the total amount of water that would go through that plant in 10 years is 2.63 billion gallons of water. Just to kind of get your head around, that's a lot of water.
Yeah.
So I would like to see us put a specific date with the idea that in the next paragraph it said modifications can be made, and then that gives more of a specific time frame for everyone to shoot for. I understand they have to meet the DEQ requirements and that sort of thing, but it would seem to me if we set a specific time on this and like you mentioned, put the consideration in the agreement at 0, which we had originally agreed upon, then that gives a specific time that we're looking at, and then that, I mean, of course, that can be adjusted when it gets near that time.
What's the point of setting a specific date like that?
It gives them something to shoot for, and then that's the time that it has to be disassembled when they're done.
You mean shoot for to complete remediation?
Mm-hmm.
Because I think the flow of the remediation is going to be based on how it all percolates through the ground soil over that distance.
Yeah, I have no idea how long it'll take them, but I don't see a reason we can't set a specific date so that we, people in the township and people in the area have some idea of when this might happen. I mean, we could put language in there that says, well, as you mentioned, when the DEQ, that gives nobody any idea how long this could take. No, absolutely none. And I personally would like to see a more specific date set on accomplishing this goal. And it doesn't tie the hands of the Air Force. Obviously, if they need more time, we can modify the agreement as it says in the next paragraph and extend that contract for another year, 2 years, 5 years, whatever they feel they're going to need. But I think the community would like to have a more concrete idea of what kind of time frame we're looking at. And if we send this agreement to the Air Force and they absolutely say, well, 10 years is strictly not anywhere near enough time, then we adjust it according to what they would say. If they say 20 years, then we would put a 20-year date on there. That would make it 2038.
I kind of like the date idea just because it gives you, not for the same thing that Bill's talking about, but at least it's a time to review what's going on with it instead of setting up the plant and just turning it loose and never going back to check on it and see what's happening or what the progress is, or, you know, if it's 10 years from now, if anybody on this board is even going to be here for that matter. And so then they have the new board or the new people, new superintendent or whoever has a date to look at something like that and go back and say, hey, this is what was going on with this, and, you know, do we need to look at this and figure something else out with the Air Force or see where this project is at? Either way, to me, is okay, but I would like to see the date thing.
Is the idea that we would potentially say, no, we wouldn't extend? I mean, I guess that's the reason why I'm wondering where 10 years is coming from, because the Air Force has been remediating pollution or contamination for 30 years, and they're still not done with some of what they started out with. So 10 years is a drop in the bucket to my way of thinking.
Well, the 10 years would be a fixed point, and like I said, it states in paragraph 5 modification that the agreement could be modified. So even though we have a specific date in mind, that obviously can be extended for a number of years to meet whatever goals has to be done. But that was one of my thoughts, Ms. McGuire mentioned, is that, you know, 10 years from now, whoever's on this board, they at least would have a specific time frame that they could actually look at and know what to expect from the Air Force. And I would just like to see what the response from the Air Force would be on that. They may have some engineering information that would give them a better idea of how many years would be involved. And if they could come back and say, you know, no, really, we're going to need 20 years on this, well, then we could just change the date to 2038 with the ability to modify it at that time.
Seems to me that by putting in a date and then thinking that we may just modify it down the road, it seems we may be building in work for ourselves down the line, administration, where if we put the gap on the end, makes it more flexible based on when the DEQ says the Air Force is done remediating, hopefully the contract would just be in place the whole time. I see some of the points. The one about checking back into it speaks the most to me, but I would hope we're doing that anyways. Maybe a naive or wishful thinking of future boards to stay on top of this. But I think I'd rather just put something in there and be done with it and hope not to have to see this agreement again until we're done with remediation.
Any other comments? Is there a motion?
I'm assuming your term consideration means money. And that money we would be asking the Air Force money or vice versa?
That would presumably be some kind of lease payment to the township for use of the property.
All right.
We had agreed to allow them to use that, have access to that property for no cost.
We did.
So the consideration would be zero.
That is correct.
And you're suggesting that we should state that in there?
Well, the agreement has a provision that acknowledges the termination, so we would need to modify it. And indicate that it was zero or eliminate the provision altogether.
And you are going to include something you brought up here tonight is the landscaping, maintenance, lawn. That will be added to the document. It's not
That
there.
is a question. It's not specifically addressed now. Does it rise to the level of significance that we think it should be?
Do we anticipate the building taking up the majority of the lot?
There actually could be two buildings, we believe. They may expand in the future, so it would take up a significant portion, I would think.
Okay. So an expansion could include another building, not just a large building with room for expansion within the building.
The Air Force conveyed to me was that it was gonna be a large building with empty space in it to accommodate expansion.
All right, that was my understanding too, but I suppose the potential of a second building, I mean, is possible. Okay, but with just one building, I guess have they given any indication of size or no, or usage of the lot?
They did mention something, but I guess I'm not prepared to comment on the lot coverage. you
Sure.
know, In terms of remaining maintenance
I
obligations.
can appreciate that. Thank you.
I mean, there's not a lot of grass right now, John,
Yeah, that's what
because there's the tennis courts.
Tennis courts, yeah.
The building that's there now, and there's a small amount, and there's a little bit of a drive and parking as well behind there, but yeah. Not a ton of grass, but
that's
it depends on when they take the tennis court out, how much grass is left around the building when they build the building.
Do they maintain the grass and other things around their other pump and treat places? Or do we do that?
Probably we do where it's applicable to Township and the airport in those areas.
Okay.
I don't mean to be picky, but we don't know the size of this building. What if they fill 98% of the lot that we have here, and it violates our code for building on lots, too much coverage of the lot or something like that? Are we gonna get ourselves into trouble?
They don't have to adhere to those.
They don't have to, okay. All right,
No, that's what the Forest Service has said. I mean, they will try when the Forest Service does renovations on their property.
okay.
I would assume they would have to adhere to any FAA regulations in regard to height and, yeah, and that kind of thing. But when it comes to our zoning, local.
I have conflicting information on that, because I thought they still had to comply with certain ordinances we have. Can you follow up and verify on that?
Yes.
So is there a motion?
I'll make a motion to finalize the access agreement with the consideration being 0 and a term of 10 years on the termination.
Is there support?
Is that with the flexibility to, if the Air Force says, you know, we think it's gonna take like 25, we could change it?
Sure.
Okay, I'll support that.
Motion by Mr. Palmer, support by Ms. McGuire. Roll call?
Mr. Nordine, no. Mr. Palmer,
Yes.
Ms. McGuire.
Yes,
Mr. Byer,
Yes.
Mr. Cummings,
No.
Mr. Gasky,
No.
Mr. Weed.
No, motion's failed. Is there another motion?
I move that the termination of the contract be stipulated on the Department of Environmental Quality giving the Air Force a passing report, thus ending the need for the remediation and allowing the Air Force to begin the removal of the building.
I'll support that.
Motion by Mr. Cummings, support by Mr. Byer.
Doesn't that put the termination date then on the DEQ as opposed to the Air Force?
Yeah,
It
fine.
does, but it puts the termination date on the product of the project, not on the Air Force. Quite bluntly, I'm not looking to the Air Force to manage themselves. I'm looking for the DEQ to do that.
Any period after the end of DEQ? Any specific period, I mean, is what I'm,
Oh, no, it
As
was
part of the
as the
motion?
event of.
Okay, the event
It's the
of.
event.
Okay.
Yeah, the event.
begins removal, all right?
would we get notified then?
Yes, yeah, we would. We would, the DEQ would let us know that event had occurred. just like we would get reports from other testing that they do. So the airport authority would hear about it, and thus we would hear about it because the township is on that board.
So what's stopping the DEQ to say, okay, it's 45% cleaned up, we're good with that?
Well, they have state laws that they have to live to, so it's not a judgment call for them. They have to take the water samples, and the water samples simply have to meet or fall within the limits set by the state. So it becomes a matter of the DEQ managing the Air Force and the success of the remediation process. And to that degree, if, for example, this remediation wasn't working at all, for example, the DEQ would again step in. So it's really keeping, my belief in stating this termination this way gets us out of the business of trying to manage and monitor the Air Force and puts it on the state and the DEQ where I believe it belongs. That's my perspective.
I personally agree with you, but I mean, a state agency like the Department of Environmental Quality has a lot more muscle with the Air Force than Oscoda Township, so.
Exactly. Hence my reason for wanting to get out of that loop.
Any other comments on the motion?
You're including, you didn't mention the consideration.
I didn't hear it. Oh, I'm sorry. Well, yes, I guess that's true. So I get to amend my motion with the consideration of $0. I love these motions that take 5 minutes to state.
I'm not sure John does.
You got it.
All right, roll call.
Do we have a second? I missed that part.
Oh, we have a motion by Mr. Cummings, support by Mr. Byer.
Very good, thank you. Mr. Gasky,
Yes.
Ms. McGuire,
Yes.
Mr. Cummings,
Yes.
Mr. Byer,
Yes.
Mr. Nordine, yes, Mr. Palmer,
Yes.
Mr. Weed.
Yes, motion's passed. Next, wage salary schedule.
Yes, when I had put my report together, I had anticipated that we would have a revised and corrected wage and salary schedule for 2018 to present this evening, and Mr. Nordine does in fact have such a schedule. I believe it's on the board table. What had happened is some oversights were discovered affecting a limited number of positions. The clerk's office went ahead and implemented the first payroll process of the current year based upon the fact that 2% adjustments were going to be made in keeping with past discussion. So the schedule on the board table is intended to reflect the corrections, and we had talked Friday, attached to my report was also a proposed seasonal employee wage schedule. And there were some corrections made to the plan, if you will. It's not a schedule so much as a plan, in that COLA was applied to a column that shouldn't have been, or two columns. So we've provided a corrected plan, and then what was intended to be a simplified version of the seasonal employee wage schedule, because it's become somewhat burdensome in implementation. I think we now recognize, based on discussion Friday morning, that it is not that simplistic and straightforward. So for purposes of this evening's discussion, we may want to just consider the amended plan or the corrected model and take the revision to the seasonal wage schedule overall under advisement moving forward. So got a corrected classification and compensation plan, and also a seasonal employee wage schedule.
Comments?
Well, yeah, I'm a little confused because when this was in the packet and we discussed Friday, I thought it primarily concerned seasonal employees, and yet none of these are seasonal employees.
Yep.
Two different things.
Yeah, there's two aspects to this agenda item. The one we discussed at length on Friday was a seasonal aspect, but also mentioned Friday is that there is a correction to be made to the overall regular employees, non-seasonal, permanent employees, schedule as well. And so both of those are in front, the corrected seasonal, in front of the board. Both the seasonal is in the packet and the, permanent employees version of the, corrected scale is in front of us in paper
For regular employees?
for, permanent.
Okay, so this is, because this is new, we didn't have this before, but this is
Correct.
corrected from what we
Yeah,
had
Yeah,
in
there
the
were a
past.
few, who the COLA wasn't applied or it was over-applied that we noticed when we making the 2018 adjustments.
Okay, so now this is correct,
I hope so.
but the seasonal employees, which is what originally we were talking about,
Yep.
Friday, we were just gonna go with the proposed agreement that's here?
What I took away from Friday was that we'd go with the corrected, and we weren't quite ready to commit to the new proposed schedule. That's just what I gathered.
Yeah, it looked like we were going into such depths that we're gonna require far more than an hour to discuss.
Okay, all right,
So simply, it would be the approval of both corrected versions, the seasonal and the permanent
okay.
schedules.
John, have we checked with other communities to see how they handle their seasonal employees?
I have not, no. I don't know if
I
it
don't
has
know if
ever
that
been
would
done in
be
the past, but I have
helpful
not
or-
personally, no.
It could be, I think, somewhat helpful if we're wondering whether the current approach is reasonable and the norm in terms of the steps and the incentive process. We could do some checking. I would suspect it's somewhat unique, but we could find out, certainly.
Is there a motion?
I'll make a motion that we approve the wage scale for the seasonal people as presented, the 2% 3-year that was proposed by the clerk, and the corrected version of the compensation and classification plan for 2018. Or do you need two separate ones?
I
think it's a 3%.
Yeah, I don't think we need two separate motions personally. I don't know anything, but I do believe
Oh, it's 3%? No.
the one you referenced in your motion referenced 2% increments. That was the proposed one that I was suggesting that seemed Friday to warrant more discussion.
Oh, okay.
So
Well, nobody was arguing with it, so I didn't know if they wanted to have more discussion about
I
it or
don't think
not.
anybody wanted to get back in there.
Okay. It was 2% for 3 years, right? So it went up at a gradual, or was it the 3%?
2% year after year, year on year.
Yeah,
Yeah, for 3 years.
not to argue against myself, but I think that's what we were lacking consensus for on Friday.
Okay, well, I'm just gonna
I
make
think
a
you
motion
got it.
and see what, okay. It was 2% for the, 3 consecutive years, so it came out to the same increase
Okay.
instead of going up and down.
Right,
That
exactly.
was the proposed,
Yes.
yeah, okay.
Is there support?
Yes.
Motion by Ms. McGuire, support by Mr. Byer.
All right.
Roll call?
Mr. Byer,
Yes.
Mr. Gasky,
Yes.
Ms. McGuire,
Yes.
Mr. Cummings,
Yes.
Mr. Palmer,
Yes,
Mr. Nordine, yes, Mr. Weed.
Yes, motion's passed. Next, Uniform Code Traffic Adoption.
Yes, meetings have taken place involving myself, clerk, treasurer, police chief, and in one instance, a representative of Oscoda County to talk about potential implementation of the Uniform Traffic Code. We have been hopeful to receive year-end numbers for 2017, which might have provided a little more guidance on the topic. We do not have those at this point. Thought we should bring the topic forward for further discussion at the board level. There is a spreadsheet that was put together intended to analyze and conceptualize the historical data regarding this topic. As a result of that spreadsheet, which covers a 3-year period, it appears at the bottom line, if you will, in terms of revenue that would be available through the Uniform Traffic Code adoption. would be just slightly less than $9,000 currently. Those calculations assume that we would enter into an agreement with the county prosecutor similar to the arrangement that another community in the county has. In considering the data, it should be noted that the collection numbers for fines appear to be trending down, at least over the 3-year basis. And I know that's a relatively short timeline, and so I would characterize it as a near-term view. But if that trend remains in place, we would then assume for 2018, the revenue would be reduced further on a year-to-year basis. Also, the board should be aware, as we touched on Friday morning, that revenue would be lost to the district library as a result of implementing this process. As I noted, however, there are other governmental units in the county that are doing it, so we're not plowing new ground, so to speak, but it is a relevant consideration. All told, the data and evaluation appear to indicate that the revenue generation potential for the initiative is limited, probably more so than we anticipated when we began discussion some time ago. There are also legal and potential liability considerations. So given the analysis and the information we now have at hand, the question is, do we want to consider moving ahead with implementation? Is additional investigation and evaluation necessary, or do we want to set it aside for the time being? I think the consensus of the work group was that we should set it aside for the time being, but that's ultimately a valuation for the board to make. So we are looking for feedback at this point as to where you would like to proceed with this topic.
Comments?
Yeah, question, Bob. Who is initiating this? County, or the fact that we're even talking about this? Where did it start?
Look to your left.
To your left.
I brought it.
Really? Okay.
Well, if I can explain, the history of this came from, I think it was 2015, long before I was a board member. I was attending a board meeting just like this, and on the agenda was discussion of eliminating the sting officer that we had provided to Sting. And at that time, the county prosecuting attorney, along with several officers, made statements at the meeting concerning this, saying that they, were against it. And I was simply in the audience, like everyone here, just observing. And the prosecuting attorney brought this to everyone's attention, that this is a viable thing that can be done that would generate money to the township, which, when she mentioned that, personally, I had no idea that the tickets that our police department writes, none of that money comes back to the township. I was totally unaware of that, and it kind of took me by surprise. Now, looking at the numbers, it obviously would not be enough money to, pay for an officer or anything like that. But it seemed to me that in the struggles we're having with the police department in funding it, that whatever monies we can bring into the township, to me it seemed like a good idea. And she provided me with this information, and when I looked at it, now granted, since that time it's become more of a complicated issue than was originally posed by the prosecutor at that time, because she's the one that said, it'd be a simple agreement between the township and the prosecutor to handle the tickets, and it's not a big deal. So I at the time, I did not see that it really isn't a problem. It's additional money that would come into and in my opinion, should come into the township, because if our police department are writing tickets, and I know nobody likes to get a ticket, but if our police department's writing tickets on people in our township, it seems fair to me that at least part of that money should come back to the township.
Right.
Now, I still believe that.
Yep.
As you point out, it's not a huge amount of money, and apparently the fee for the current prosecutor is more than what the former prosecutor was telling me the amount would be. So that amount has gone up, which reduces our income. But that's just a little bit of history about how this came about, and I've been pushing this now for 2 years, I believe, that to take a look at this, and I still think it's a good idea. Like I say, it brings money into the township that, in my opinion, should be in the township. But whatever the board feels, if you feel there's liability issues and it's not worth pursuing, then so be it.
Well, in fairness to you, I do remember that meeting, and I do remember Nicole Palumbo being there and mentioning that.
Yes.
So, I guess my second comment is you're talking about, if tickets are written in the township, we should get some, hopefully significant part of the revenue from them. But that can work badly too, can it? I mean, you've heard maybe of cases around the country where tickets are issued at an exorbitant rate just to generate money for the community, and maybe more than they should. The tickets, the rate,
Well,
A neighboring community, I'm not saying they were doing this at all, please, but a neighboring community had a reputation for tickets and so forth. I don't, not maybe because of that reason, but you could see a municipality just cranking out the tickets. And
Well, we already have a reputation for writing tickets, even though you can see we pretty rarely write out a ticket. We already have a reputation that the money's already coming to the township, even though, in fact, that is not what's happening. So public perception is very different than the reality.
yeah.
However, based on the amount here, that if we have another year where it's only $8,000 that's drawn in from fines, and the fees that go out could then make that only $1,000 return, which then also pulls a significant amount from the library, I think it's probably best that we do, like you had said before, just wait a little longer on this and figure out some more aspects of it.
were you able to get the 2017 results?
We don't have those now. Certainly, we can make them available as soon as they're in our hands.
I would think maybe once we get those numbers available, because like you mentioned, the numbers have been going down over the last couple of years. Maybe once we get the 2017 results, maybe at a future date, we could take this up again and take a look at what those numbers are and what our portion would be at that time then.
Sure.
Something that's come to light for me during this process is I'd like to see more numbers, more information on a lot of the elements of this. So not only the 2017 numbers, but the past numbers even before 2014, so we can establish more of a trend.
Yep.
See if it goes up and down, or if it's just nosediving, or what's happening would be beneficial to me. And it'd be interesting to find out if traffic, actually safety, if accidents have gone up while these tickets have gone down, or are people just driving safer in the township. This is only one piece of the puzzle. It's one dimensional to me. I think it's got a lot of implications surrounding this. So I'd like to see some more information, more statistics come out of the police department that speak to this situation. And I know we've talked about some of those in the group that's gotten together.
Right.
But
Two things. One, I like the topic, Mr. Palmer. I remember as well when you brought this up the last time at the in the prior board before the last election. And the concern about money somehow being generated just because we have such an agreement on the books, goes down that whole road of whether or not our police department would have quotas. And I don't think that would be the case here, because that would have to come from the board or have to come from Mr. Stalker down to the police chief for that kind of a thing to occur. And I don't see any one of us instituting such a decision. So at least I wouldn't be in favor of something like that.
Right, quotas don't work.
No, this is strictly a refunneling of the money that's tickets that are issued now.
Right.
Portion of that would come back to the township, which Right now, all of the money goes to the county.
I just wanted to take that quota topic head on.
Being a part of the work group myself, one of the biggest key things for me was the loss of the money for the district library, because it's not just the $9,000, it would be double that, is that correct? Double or triple that?
Yeah, the losses for the library are, generally speaking, just a little less than the total fines the township generates. It varies by year, and we can certainly
Right.
provide those, but
So, yeah, you're just kind of robbing, taking away from one thing to do something else where for that little of amount, you could probably go through the budget process with the police chief and cut that amount of money, and you'd be just as good, so.
And this amount that the prosecutor said he was gonna charge for this is quite a bit higher than I had anticipated based on information from
Yeah,
several years ago.
yeah.
I move we set this aside for future study.
Support.
Motion by Mr. Byer, support by Mr. Cummings. Roll call?
Ms. McGuire,
Yes.
Mr. Cummings,
Yes.
Mr. Gieske,
Yes.
Mr. Nordine, yes, Mr. Palmer,
Yes.
Mr. Byer,
Yes.
Mr. Weed.
Yes, motion's passed. Next, backhoe sale.
yes, I've attached a copy of an ad that we published to solicit bids on our used 1994 John Deere 310D backhoe. We had set a minimum price of $15,000, did not get any takers at that amount. I reduced it to $13,000 after discussing it. And we still have had no interest in that amount. So from a staff perspective, we had thought that we should be seeking bids of no more than $10,000 moving forward. And I had specifically suggested that the minimum bid be reduced to $9,000 with the understanding that it could be reduced further at staff discretion. For everybody's enlightenment, there was discussion Friday about the potential benefit also of delaying the relisting of the auction sale until later in the spring, when the market for this kind of equipment might be a little bit more helpful to the township. So, having said that, I'm looking for direction as to an amount and timing.
One of my comments was that, is this a good time to sell? Rather than just back to back, trying to lower the price or adjust it, that we just wait and list it at a time when it may be more feasible for, or when contractors may be more interested in purchasing.
How often do these auctions occur that we were in before? Is it a monthly or?
You can, I believe you have some discretion in how long you list, so it's pretty much, you can start anytime you want, and then it's for a specified time frame.
Oh, so this is an ongoing
It is.
auction? I
Yes.
see, okay.
Comments?
Yeah, I think waiting to see what the market, or to see if we can get a better market to sell this in is I agree with that. I thought that the first go around. I'd also, if we continue on this road and can't sell it, I'd be interested in maybe repairing it. It just seems, and then trying to sell it or use it for our own. I don't want to give it away for nothing. It's an asset that I think we should try and get something for, so.
It's certainly not scrap. And to the other point that was raised on the Friday work session is that it costs us nothing to keep it. It's not like our insurance goes down by getting rid of this one piece of equipment, so it's.
So in that vein, I know we know that the reverser is bad on. I'd be interested possibly at what, not exhaustive, but what other problems it may have. No rush, because if we're going to be if we end up waiting, I mean, that's assuming that, I do not know, but I would be interested to know what problems it has.
Any other comments?
What was the reason why the reverser, it seemed like it came up as like, once that happened, we wanted to get rid of it kind of thing. Is there a tremendous cost of fixing that?
I believe it was around $3,800 to repair it in that neighborhood.
Well, it's also an older piece of machinery, so we're dealing with a lot of loosening up over time. So there could be, if we were to maintain it, keep it, the repairs needed on it could be more substantial than just that reverser gear.
When we don't need an additional, when we just purchase a brand new one, right? So this makes extra equipment.
Yeah, it would certainly make extra equipment. The only thing, it just seems strange to me, it just seems, someone wiser than myself in matters of these, it mentioned that the wear and tear it would get in a construction setting or something. I can't imagine we're too hard on these things. We're not working them 12 hours a day, all day, or all week. So it just seems there's gotta be some value left in the thing, even after all this time.
Well, I'm not sure this is the machine, but I believe it might be. There was one of our machines that was used to remove utilities in the villages, before it was the villages of Oscoda, extensively. It was an
That's okay.
extended, protracted effort,
Okay.
more than
Sure.
standard use, yeah.
Interesting.
I make a motion, we go ahead and list it for $10,000 in the month of March.
Support.
Motion by Mr. Weed, support by Mr. Palmer. Roll call?
Mr. Cummings.
Yeah, I guess I have to say yes. I'm just struggling with the price.
So it is a yes?
Yes, yeah.
Ms. McGuire.
Yes.
Mr. Gajewski.
Yes.
Mr. Palmer.
Yes.
Mr. Nordine, no. Mr. Byer.
Yes.
Mr. Weed.
Yes, motion's passed. Next, property purchase agreement.
When I put my report together, I was anticipating receipt of a signed purchase agreement for the property located at 220 East Michigan Avenue. I do have that document from the seller in hand now. So that I am seeking the board's approval for execution of the purchase agreement, subject to satisfactory title as determined by the township, being witnessed by a title commitment. So there is a contingency. And then moving forward with the purchase process, I assume we'll be obtaining a boundary survey and a Phase 1 environmental assessment, so we can achieve liability protection from an environmental standpoint.
Comments? Is there a motion?
Yes, I move that we go ahead with this, finalize this purchase.
Support.
Motion by Mr. Byer, support by Ms. McGuire. Roll call?
Ms. McGuire.
Yes.
Mr. Cummings.
Yes.
Mr. Byer.
Yes.
Mr. Nordine, yes. Mr. Gajewski.
Yes.
Mr. Palmer.
Yes.
Mr. Weed.
Yes, motion's passed. Next, F41 streetlights.
But we're going to talk about the snowblower.
Sorry, I put it in the wrong section there. So prior to that, we have information for the snow blower purchase.
Yes, I've recently received some cost quotes from our Building and Grounds Maintenance Department to purchase a snow blower for the Ani Medical Center. And to purchase a commercial machine is going to be a couple $100 over my administrative spending authority, approximately $2,200. That's the suggestion versus a non-commercial type machine for $1,600. So my intent, pending a little bit further discussion with our staff, is to proceed on that basis. But I wanted to make the board aware of that, since it would be a purchase and exceedance of $2,000 if we go down that road. And if anybody has any questions or concerns in that regard, certainly.
If it is an excess, do we need to do a motion?
Well, that would be at the board's discretion.
Okay.
I would say that probably to be safe, that would be
Yeah.
helpful.
Is it only going to be used at Ani, or can they use it here at the library and a couple other places out here?
They could, my understanding is this machine primarily stays at the medical center, but it could be transported, yes.
Okay.
So it's a walk behind.
It is.
Do they have one now, and we're looking to replace it, or is this something new?
I think it's a replacement.
Do you have any information you can provide us about what it is, the brand, the model?
It's a Simplicity.
Probably a 12 horse,
Yeah.
probably a 24-inch throw
I thought
on
it'd be
it,
something.
2-stage,
28-inch Simplicity
28-inch.
Pro.
They're not cheap.
28-inch,
Yeah.
12 horse. 10
So
or
one that
12
I
horse.
bought so many years ago cost me $2,400
Yeah.
for, you know, when you get one it's got some width to it, so.
Yeah.
I don't see the price being unreasonable.
Okay.
With a cab.
Unless you're gonna buy one off of Craigslist, but
Have them bring it to the e-commerce zone.
Yeah.
During the day.
Yeah.
all right, is there comments or a motion?
I would make a motion that we approve the purchase of the snow blower in the amount, what was the amount again?
$2,170.
$2,170.
Support that.
Motion by Mr. Palmer, support by Mr. Gieske. Roll call.
Mr. Byer,
Yes.
Mr. Cummings,
Yes.
Mr. Nordine, yes. Mr. Palmer,
Yes.
Mr. Gasky,
Yes.
Ms. McGuire,
Yes.
Mr. Weed.
Yes, motion's passed. Now we're at F41 streetlights.
All right, thank you. At the work session held on December 13th, the board discussed several carryover topics from previous work sessions, one of which was the ongoing problems with the decorative streetlights located on the west side of F41 from the intersection of Cedar Lake Road to the Skeel Road entrance at the Wordsmith District. The Building and Grounds Department consulted with a local electrician to evaluate the condition of the fixtures themselves, including the original installation method and wiring. The inspection revealed that the existing system had failed in some instances, and an estimated cost to replace the fixtures, which included a new installation layout, was previously presented to the board for review and consideration. Discussion on the topic during that work session resulted in direction to staff to solicit input from Consumers Energy in regard to the potential to increase the amount of over-the-road lighting in that area, should the board elect to remove the decorative streetlights. The staff has been working with a representative from Consumers Energy on this matter, and this afternoon I did receive an email that I forwarded on to the board as well by email today, and then provided a hard copy this evening. And just to kind of go over that, basically, again, as we discussed on Friday, Consumers Energy is no longer going to be installing any of the lights that are attached to the wires over the road throughout the state of Michigan. They will continue to replace them and if they go bad or anything like that, but no new installations. So if we're looking to do any lights in that area, it would all be the Cobra lights that go on the arms from the existing light poles in that area. So that being said, Casey's first evaluation of that area, he estimates if, again, we had those existing lights that are already there, he estimates between 20 and 25 additional lights would be needed. And in question or answer to your question Friday, Martin, about staggering the lights, I hadn't noticed if they were light poles on both sides, and there obviously are, and Casey had indicated they would, in their lighting installation layout, look at staggering the lights to get the best use, from the lighting output, so.
Good.
So they would do that. So basically this evening, I mean, we can go over the information, but what we'd be doing right now is if the board wants to entertain, moving in this direction, then Mr. Lee asked if we could decide whether or not we wanted to look at an LED fixture or the high pressure sodium fixtures. We don't have to commit to which wattage or anything like that, but just so that he could actually put a formal proposal together. But at first blush, basically the cost of putting those overhead lights, if you're just gonna stay with an HPS, which is the high pressure sodium, the cost is basically $100 per light. If you want to upgrade to a LED fixture, then there's an additional charge. So it's the $100 plus the amount that's highlighted there. So if we were looking at a 54-watt Cobra LED, then it would be $90 a fixture. So if you just use that 25 fixtures, I took the high end, that would be an additional $2,250 for, to upgrade to the 54 watt. If you were looking at a 72 watt, which is equivalent to 150 watts of HPS, again, using that 25 fixture figure at 212 apiece, that would be $5,300. And I did double check my math twice, Bill, so hopefully you don't find any mistakes with that.
Where did they
Well,
get the
I do
impression?
find an error in that, but,
You do?
well, the 200,
I should have never asked that question, because and then if you flip the page over, he also gave, there's a cost, then there's a monthly cost, just like we pay now, there's a monthly usage cost. And as you could expect, the HPS costs more than what an LED does. So, and again, looking at 25 lights installation over a year's time, if you flip the page, you can kind of look at those numbers. Again, it's just to kind of show you, if we went with the 54 watt LED, it's estimated that it would be $2,388 a year in usage. So, and if you went with the HPS lights, that's estimated at $3,504. So that's a difference of, like a little over $1,100. And then if you were looking at the 72 watt LED, it would be roughly $2,583 in usage. And then compared to the HPS 150 watt, which is $4,290. So it's a difference of $1,700. So, over time, you save money with the LED. It would, and he had indicated that most communities are now starting to switch to the LED overhead lights. So.
I would prefer to have LED, long-range costs are better, but I'm confused here where it says the approximate 20 to 25 additional lights. To me, I could see maybe 12 additional, but
Well,
I was hoping we weren't looking at replacing the equivalent as to how many lights are along that sidewalk right now.
I think his lighting study would kind of show better. He wants to do an official, installation survey where you would show where the light is located, then how the lumens project to see what the coverage is. And that would be more, using the existing over road lights as kind of a starting point.
and the 20 to 25 then would take it all the way down to Skeel
To Skeel, yes.
Avenue, which we don't have now,
Correct. We stopped short of.
right?
Did you find anything about reuse of the Cobra lights that are not used right now on Wordsmith?
No, I didn't ask that question. I believe all of those are HPS lights, but they could maybe use the arms and retrofit, I'm not sure.
And you made a comment Friday about the arms, how much they cost. Is consumers going to absorb that cost?
That's the $100 a fixture for the
That's
arms.
the $100 fixture with the light, plus the light.
For the HPS. If you were if we decided to just want to go with the HPS, the high pressure sodium, the arm, the 25-foot arm and the light is $100 a fixture. It's upgrading to the LED fixture that you have that additional cost.
Right.
And then they maintain the lights moving forward. We pay the usage, but then they maintain. So they change the light bulbs. If the arm breaks, get hit, I don't think a semi would be tall enough to hit anything there, but if something, were to take a light out, then they would do all the maintenance on them.
Okay. I had a question. Yeah, last spring, the board was presented with the information that there was going to be an apartment complex developing on Georgia, on the outskirts of the Wordsmith Air Force Base. I was wondering if anybody happened to recall what the capacity of that apartment complex was going to be.
Is it still gonna happen?
I believe
Kind
it
of
is.
quiet.
They've purchased the property, but to the best of my knowledge, has not been any site plan review done by the planning commission.
Not yet.
So, yeah.
Well, anyway, my thought was with that developing, and I expected that this would actually materialize, because I know that Coletta is in desperate need of housing for their employees, and this was something I was told at the time had Coletta funding or support, that I think that, improving the lighting along the 41 corridor, where that traffic would be coming to and from, would make sense.
So just for clarification, Anna, let's say for instance, the 72 watt LED fixture is $212. Is that on top of the $100 flat fee?
Yes. So you would take the,
So it'd be $312 total.
right, I
Each
guess I didn't do the math that way. I was taking the original costs. This is in addition to, so if you were looking at 25 lights at a HPS, that would be $2,500. So that's just your flat. So if we want to convert to LED, then to convert to LED, it would be an additional $5,300 for the 72 watts, or an additional $2,250 to the base 2,500. So the base is 2,500 no matter how you look at it with HPS. If you want to convert to LED, then you would add that.
So, and we may agree on this, I add your two numbers together, but what I would come up with, if we went with a 72 watt, the $212, and did 25 fixtures, it would come to approximately $7,800
Right, 25 and, yeah,
times 312.
right. Is that 25 and
So what do you need from us tonight?
7,800, right. That's why I said 25 is the base for HPS. If you want to convert to the LED, then you would add those two in there.
Right.
Right,
That comes to 7,800,
correct.
yes.
53 and 25.
I think basically direction as to whether the LED is the preferred technology. Enough information so that we can ask them, and confirmation, I believe, that we would like to go ahead and pursue the initiative. And that,
I think we need to see the lighting study first, right?
Well,
Right.
right, you're not committing to moving forward with the project. He's gonna then put a formal cost estimate together. What he's asking for this evening is just, are we wanting to look at an LED, or are we wanting to look at a HPS? I think just so he can run the numbers a little bit better. Maybe there's a discount, I'm not sure, he didn't really
I
say.
prefer LED.
I do too.
Yep.
I have a question about the two. LED lasts longer, and in the long run, you save money and so forth. How about actual light that you get? Is it better than the older?
It's, I mean, I think it all depends on, you don't wanna look directly at it compared to a HPS,
That's
I
why they
guess.
gave a wattage
Yeah.
comparison on here.
Right. But he did say in the areas where there's the apartments or housing, you could put the diffusers a little bit more and have it so that it's aimed, so it's not going towards, any output towards like the apartments and so on. So you're not gonna have things, shining in their windows. Because the LED is definitely a brighter light,
Okay.
so.
Well, I think, my opinion is that this is important. I don't have the final solution here, but boy, we have a lot of traffic coming off the base with the industry and the housing we're talking about, the library, the college. Wow. And it's pretty dark now, so.
Yeah, that corridor gets very dark. There are no commercial buildings to speak of, except where you have the commercial bank, or chemical bank. But at night, that's very dark. There's not much going on there. So it gets pretty dark along that aisleway, even when you've got your headlights on.
There are some portions that are, but the other portions are pretty bright, especially with those sidewalk lights that are there
Agreed.
right now, which just turns that into like a fashion runway strip. But regardless of that, so we have consensus LEDs are the way we want to go?
I think so.
Okay.
Okay.
So then we'll do a study. For the strategic work plan, can you add an item on there for discussing overall township lighting? Especially the Wordsmith district.
And this is a considerably less expensive proposition than trying to replace the decorative lights that we have now, in my understanding, with the problems with the electrical and the wiring and that sort of thing.
A lot less and zero maintenance,
And zero maintenance.
which is,
So my recommendation would be to go with the 72 watt LEDs. As opposed to going with the 54 and get them all put up and then find out, oh, that's not quite bright enough. So,
Yeah, 72s.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Parks Planning and Design Services.
All right, attached to my report are documents that were produced by the consultant Beckett and Rader as a result of the kickoff meeting that occurred on December 13th in regard to a December 13th, 2017, in regard to a comprehensive development plan for the Oscoda Beach Park, Ratliff Park, and Furtaw Field. The consultant has asked that the board review the meeting minutes and the schedule that were provided by him to ensure that the elements and objectives that were discussed are reflected in the meeting minutes. If after review of the material, any board members would like to make any additions, changes, or modifications, if you could please if we could discuss those this evening, if you've had time to review, or get them to me, so they can be implemented into the meeting minutes. I haven't heard from anybody in regard to there being any overwhelming issues.
No, I
or
actually
additions.
thought the minutes were good.
Any other comments?
well, I think this is why we need to have our goals and objectives, our strategic planning meeting as soon as possible, and that being in February, we can look at this, because they did note in there that any grants that we might be looking for some of this work would have to be in by April 1st, so it doesn't give us a lot of time to move forward with a lot of things to apply for grants this year for some of the projects. So we need to move along. But I didn't have any problem with the minutes from that meeting. I thought they
Then
were,
I'll let them know that we're good to go.
yeah.
Thank you.
All right, next item is Resolution 2018-01 for easements.
Okay, as the board is aware, the township is currently seeking easements from property owners for the Phase 1 water main extension project due to PFAS contamination. According to the title commitment policy from Landmark Title Company, under Section B, it's necessary to have the board adopt a resolution to state the necessity of the easement itself, as well as who is authorized on behalf of the township to sign the documents. Resolution 2018-01 was drafted by the township's attorney and is on tonight's agenda in order to facilitate this requirement of the title commitment.
Any comments about it? And let us move to Resolution 2018-01 for easements. Is there a motion?
I'll move.
Support.
Motion by Ms. McGuire, support by Mr. Gajewski. Roll call.
Mr. Gajewski,
Yes.
Ms. McGuire,
Yes.
Mr. Byer,
Yes.
Mr. Nordine, yes, Mr. Palmer,
Yes.
Mr. Cummings,
Yes.
Mr. Weed.
Yes, motion's passed. Under Other, Spicer Group proposal for the Iosco Exploration Trail grant applications. Grant deadline is April 1st for the DNR grant, specifically the MNRTF grant. That grant is proposed to leverage against the matching required funds needed for both two federal grants, the TAP and FLAP grants. TAP is Transportation Alternatives Programs, and the FLAP is Federal Land Acquisition Program. This is the same procedure that was used for the Phase 1 project. It worked very well. We were able to use $140,000 as a match against about $2.1 million. So we hope to get the same amount again this year, to use Spicer in this grant writing because they were so successful at the last time. Last time, I believe it cost the county $10,000 to do this. This time, they're proposing $7,500. I've talked with Light Schellenbarger at the county about this. He was good with the plan regarding us paying the $7,500 for this. We believe that the agreements that are in place right now, as far as county owning the bike path, are still applicable, but we won't know for sure until we actually get to the point right before grants get their approval, if they get approved. Any questions about that?
what's pending on the knowledge about the ownership of the trail?
Whether an agreement has to be made specific for this phase, or if the previous agreement will cover all
Okay.
phases.
Okay.
Are they required to get easements?
Yes, they will get them from the Road Commission, the DNR, Forest Service, and Consumers Energy. So far, all are in agreement with doing this. Consumers, the representatives here are all in favor of this, but they have to take the final plans and send them to the federal government for the federal government to review over them to make sure that the Federal Energy and Regulatory Commission is good with it, just like everything else we do, like at Old Orchard Park. And then the Consumers Clearinghouse program also. They've already been in negotiations with a lot of this, so far everything's looking good with it. We don't expect any hangups, but you never know. So far it'll look like it'll be pretty smooth. So the only easement we need from the DNR is at the High Banks area, that fishing area where you have those long stairs that go down. There's just a short section there owned by the state. Most of the rest of it's the Forest Service, which they're pretty much good with anything as long as their archaeological, biological, and animal surveys come out good. Which they had to do those in phase 1 in the area between the school and Grass Lake Road. So I think that covers all of
If
them.
they go through Footsite, they going on the road right away, so they don't have to get private property easements?
Correct. Yeah, we don't want any of this to go across private property.
Yeah. Okay.
Any other comments?
I think that's a pretty reasonable price for them to do everything that has to be done to get these grants, so I would be in favor of approving that $7,500 for Spicer for this grant resolution.
Is there a motion?
Question.
Yes.
Is this a service for which the board would like to have a contract put together?
For Spicer?
Yes.
Right. Contract with Spicer for
A
this.
professional services agreement?
Right.
Yeah.
So we would do agreed for the payment, have the contract, they would write the grant, we would have our public hearing, and then by April 1st, the grants would be submitted.
Yes. One way to proceed might be to accept the proposal subject to execution of a professional services agreement, if we believe that that's appropriate under the circumstances. And the value judgment there is the scope of work and the amount of money and so forth.
Okay, is there a motion?
I'll make that motion, as Bob said. Accept the proposal subject to the execution of an agreement.
Glad I was so clear.
You kept going and adding things to it.
Motion by Ms. McGuire, support by Mr. Palmer. Roll call.
Mr. Palmer,
Yes.
Mr. Byer,
Yes.
Ms. McGuire,
Yes.
Mr. Cummings,
Yes.
Mr. Gasky,
Yes.
Mr. Nordine, yes, Mr. Weed.
Yes, motion's passed. Now we're on to our second public comment period. For this one, no one needs to fill out a card, but there's still a 4-minute time limit. Please introduce yourself if you speak. Does anybody wish to speak?
Hold me to 2 minutes.
No way.
Oh, yes. On last Thursday night in Alpena, they had a town hall meeting to talk about the PFAS issues at the Alpena Combat Readiness site, which is part of the airport also. In attendance was the new MPART State Task Force team, including Carol Isaacs, the Deputy Director of External Affairs, Sue Limming, and Senator Stamas was also there. I spoke with all three of them prior to the meeting. The Air National Guard owns the facility. The Air Force is helping them, but will be transfer of coordination to the Air National Guard, but it's still Department of Defense. One surprise, at the end of the meeting, DNR fisheries biologist stood up and briefed to the whole group that over the holidays he sampled both Alpena, Two Lakes, and Grayling fish samples based on a special request by someone to the DNR. Don't know who. But if you remember, in both the RAB meeting in November and the public meeting in December, the question came up about inadequate fish sampling here in our communities and the waterways. Somewhere around 2014, maybe 15 was the last. So I just wanted to bring that up. Another thing that happened was that they announced that, and announced publicly, is that they're going to be revising the way they set standards. And they've extended the public comment period into February. The standards, like the cleanup standard that you're going to be interested in, depending on how long it takes the DEQ to say that they're cleaned up. Well, that's part of what they're going to be talking about. So what I am asking for is, they mentioned the monthly meetings with the townships as part of their coordination. And I remember you talking about, Aaron and others, talking about that you have a monthly call with the state. I would suggest that because of the importance of this information and the slowing down of public information from the state, that you fill the gap, you possibly fill the gap to the public, and maybe on a monthly basis at one of every other meetings, you give a synopsis of those calls to the public and just add it as a report that you provide. I think it would be very useful. There's a lot of things going on at the state level for PFAS, setting standards, other sites, funding, and everything. So it's just a recommendation that would help the public stay abreast of what's going on. Thank you.
Does anybody else wish to speak? All right, then we're on to board comments. Anybody have anything?
Board question. In the minutes for, I think, the December meeting, you talked about permission being sought for a snowbox derby. I'm hearing that there's news about the snowbox derby.
They canceled it.
For this year or forever?
Yeah,
No, it's been canceled and taken off the slate for no participation
Just this year? Or?
forever.
But I mean, in the past, like, let's say last year, was the participation reasonable?
No, it was canceled last year.
Oh, okay. Because of,
And the year before, the participation was down by over 50%.
okay,
And the chamber decided it was a losing proposition and canceled it forever. Took
Okay.
it off the slate.
all right.
They're working on a new program for winter activity, but it's still on the table.
Okay, all right. Sorry to see that go, but, in your informational narrative, you talked about Oscoda expressing an interest, if we sell equipment of, related to services that we share with Oscoda, they would like some of the money? Do they want half? Do they want the same ratio that they contribute? But,
We didn't get to that level of detail. I think the assumption would be if it was monetary consideration, it would I would think make sense to follow the ratio.
the ratio?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, you indicated fire engines would be one. They're quite valuable. How about police cars? For instance, when police cars go out of service, we have a use for them. Do they want the whole car, or do they want, if we sell them, they want the ratio share?
My impression is they'd be open to either, but they did mention a vehicle having benefit for them in the future,
Okay,
specifically.
all right. Okay. I think it's a reasonable request. I just didn't understand whether they wanted cash, did they want half, did they want the ratio?
Just for those who are unaware, Oscoda Township pays a portion of the police and fire services and the equipment purchased for such, so when we go to sell off old equipment, they're requesting that they receive back the ratio portion of what was sold, which is very reasonable.
Yes. Okay.
Anybody got anything else? I asked the county again about the EMS response time meetings. They said they would get back with me. There is a PFAS contamination report that was done throughout the state back in 2001. A journalist has accessed that report and gotten information from it. I've not actually seen it myself because it costs money to actually pull down that report. It's a report that was done, I don't remember where it was. Anyway, somewhere in there it stated that the test results from Wordsmith at that time were from 100 to 200,000 parts per trillion, I believe. Could have been per billion, but I think it was trillion. Anyways, the amounts were very high back then. So what's going on here at Wordsmith is not new news to anybody at the state level. Yes.
Yeah, I forgot to mention, the Restoration Advisory Board meeting that was scheduled for tomorrow has been rescheduled to February 13th at 5:30 PM here at the library. So just to let people know, and that you're all welcome to come and participate.
All right. Need a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
We are adjourned.